The life and death of Marina Abramovich continues at the Lowry until Saturday, and there'll be more on 11 rooms in which her work also features a bit later in the show. Manchester is a hive of cultural activity at the moment. The success of the Third International Festival's one sign of it. Another is the BBC's new home here in Salford, Media City. Manchester-born photographer Sefton Samuels has been documenting change in the region for 5 decades, and his collected works have just been published in a new book entitled Northerners. We sent his son Tim to interview him.
What does it truly mean nowadays to be a northerner? What makes a Mancunian from Manchester in any way distinct? It all used to be so straightforward. Growing up in Manchester in the 80s and 90s, you were part of a tribe. Northerners were cockier and cooler than soft southerners, especially Londoners, who were dead soft. But after living down in London for donkey's years, I've myself become the softest of southerners and barely recognise the city I grew up in. Challenge me nowadays to put my finger on what makes northerners so northern, and I haven't really got a clue. So I've come back to Manchester on a hunt to find the essence of northernness. This is me and my dad, Sefton Samuels. He's a famous photographer with pictures held at the National Portrait Gallery and V&A. If anyone can help me define what it is to be a northerner, it's him. Sefton has spent 5 decades photographing Manchester, the north of England, and its people. In black and white 2¼ inch snaps, he captured their approachability, their dour sense of humour, their straight-talking swagger. I was always struck by the soul of something he'd captured. So I spent the last decade badgering him to bring together his collection of northern photos as a book, which is now being published as Northerners, Portrait of a No-Nonsense People. I'm so used to being around your photographs, I haven't really asked you about the ethos behind them. No nonsense, does that in some way reflect your artistic style?
Yes, it does. I try to take pictures of life, straightforward depictions of different aspects of life. I'm quite happy for a photograph to look like a photograph. I don't want to cut it up to look like a pseudo-artistic painting. I don't go in for pictures that are set up. I think they look very false anyway. And I try to be a sort of hidden observer of life.
Sefton's self-effacing strategy has won him the trust of some awkward characters. Sam's Chop House is where L.S. Lowry once propped up the bar. The statue by Pete Hodgkinson is based on photos of Lowry Sefton took of the famously recluse painter. Rare pictures, one thanks to a concerted charm offensive on Lowry's housekeeper.
We found we had something in common. She had worked in a mill, you see, in her younger days. And she said, what I'll do is I'll drop you a line as soon as I know when he's coming home. Give him a couple of days to settle in, but don't mention my name, whatever you do. So I said, yeah, fine. And she was as good as a word.
It was the foot in the door my dad needed to get us pictures of Lowry. Lowry himself said of the photos, "The best portraits I've ever had, lad." That's me, age 13, with my teenage hero, Morrissey, in 1989. I tackled him outside his Manchester home to see if he'd do an interview for my school newspaper, and to my utter astonishment, he agreed. My dad took the snaps. Maybe I'd inherited some of that dogged determination that's seen him track down some of the North's most famous faces. Ironically, one of the most widely used sets of photos Sefton took needed almost no struggle for access. Footballer George Best used to run a menswear shop on Bridge Street.
He was leaning against one of the doorposts, enjoying the spring sunshine, and I was walking back from lunch. I spotted him, came over and said, would you mind if I took a few pictures, George? And he was very obliging and relaxed and said, yeah, that's fine. It was only, you know, a few moments, but I didn't realise then that I'd get such significant pictures.
And these would end up in the National Portrait Gallery, on Paul Weller covers,
Yeah.
all over the shop.
Oh, all over, yeah.
I mean, today, the equivalent to George Best,
Well, Ronaldo or somebody like that,
just wouldn't
I suppose.
ever get them.
Rooney, yeah. They never get near.
Sort of mirroring the change in football, it's sort of parallel. It goes from being George's boutique to now a big chain here.
Well, from a star to Starbucks.
Have you rehearsed that line?
No.
Everything in Sefton's photos appears older than it really is. The 60s images feel almost Victorian. But I think they reflected a tendency the North itself once had to look a decade or so out of date.
Come on! Please move away from the city centre area. Quickly, please!
It would take an act of violence to shake off Manchester's time lag. The 1996 IRA bomb in the heart of Manchester shook the city to the core. From the pulverised shopping precinct sprang a determination to renew and reinvent. The torrent of regeneration hit Salford the hardest. The back streets documented by Sefton, the grime, the character which inspired the birth of Coronation Street, swept away for a shiny future. Back then, when you were taking these photographs of Salford, how would you have felt to know that Manchester's going to have an international festival, an Imperial War Museum, the BBC are moving here, there's a Lowry Centre here?
I wouldn't have believed it. I mean, it is so totally unrecognisable today. It changes so rapidly that sometimes I have a job to find my way round.
Sefton's north is the north of Joy Division, Coronation Street and the Smiths. I wonder if that north is gone forever now, and whether it's still clinging on. For all the changes afoot here, coming back does seem that there is still a distinct culture, a distinct way of viewing the world up north. For me, the essence of being northern is best bottled by the photographs I grew up around. And frankly, it would be impertinent to argue with something your dad has spent 5 decades defining.